Good afternoon. Thank you for coming to this lecture. Thank you for inviting me, of course. For me, it's a great honor to be here. As you said, I am a great fan of Amos Vogel work in general. Obviously, film as a subversive art is the main work, but I've been following some other articles from the beginning, from the in other places. And, well, I am a devoted reader of his writing. But I will talk, today from my experience as a reader, but also as a filmmaker. I think that it's important that if I am here, I try to describe why this was such a great influence for me, and why what we can find in this book is, from my point of view of a creative artist, or or a pseudo-creative artist, what for me it's really important. First of all, I have to say that in my career, I was influenced, the main thing is that he's a writer, and this is a book. So for me, it was the main influence I had at the beginning of my career were writers about filmmaking, not filmmakers themselves. I was a cinephile, and I follow almost all you can follow here, but I don't know. It was not enough inspiration for me to see the film of other people to decide myself to create my own work. In fact, was the writing about film what pushed me to be a filmmaker. What is a paradox, and it's simple. I explained it several times because I wanted to be a writer too. Not writer about filmmaker, but writer about fiction. But, I was too lazy, blah, blah, blah. So the pushing side of these writers, the exigence the self-exigence, and the discipline and the precision on the intellectual effort pushed me to do something that apparently it should be as serious as what the writers were doing, but a little bit more fun and a little bit more, fun. This is a little bit more playful. We can put it this way. But, and it was specifically this book of Vogel that influenced me in a strange way. Because, as I said, I came from very specific roots. I wasn't, as a young artist, I was an admirer of, the avant-garde of the 20th century, typical thing. I was admirer of all more or less subversive artists from the 19th century, from, Romanticism on Rambo and blah, blah, blah. All these really, really, shocking artists that were reivindicated by surrealists. And, I thought that this had a dignity. And these artists were, when I was obviously young, there was this already 21st century, and at the end of 20th century, all these artists of the historical avant-garde of the beginning of 20th century had this status of myths. They were really mythical people. Also, some people from the 60s that were following this tradition, for me, as a young artist, were mythical. And for me, it was the only thing that counted. So for this reason, I wanted to be an artist, or I wanted to be a writer. Because, the charm, the glamorous side of these people was, unmatchable, we can put it this way, with other forms of art. This was literature and art, a specific art. But, nothing else. For me, cinema was like, was vulgar, was a popular art. And I was very popular in my way of living. And I really like always to be surrounded by, popular events. And I am very interested in popular culture too. But it didn't move me at that moment. I don't know why. So what Vogel did with this book, it's to give a patina of dignity to filmmaking. Because the dignity of surrealists or the beginning, or all the artists of the beginning of the 20th century was obvious. They were myths as I said. Some of the 60s people, they were already myths. So was not, you know, there was the value of the fetish, that it's very pure. You know, they create an object and, okay, it doesn't matter how many times you see it, it will always have some magic. There is nothing that can spoil it. It's the magic of art, of the simple fetish, of the simple objects, that you create your magic in your mind. But, you know, moving image was more difficult, because moving image was always, you know, surrounded by plot, by characters, by this vulgarity that, you know, prevents purity to get in, you know, this form of art. So, and of course, I was influenced. I don't know, I like Ford, but I didn't like the films of Ford. I like the ambience, you know, the ambience that my intuition told me that was there. Or I don't know, I like Mizoguchi. Yes, I like Mizoguchi, but just because there were some prostitutes or, you know, for strange reasons. You know, my cinephilia attachment of these figures was never for the canonic reasons that people make love, you know. In part because it's quite, as I said, quite vulgar somehow, some of the films, and in part because there was a humanistic approach that, I don't know, I didn't like very much, and that was not so present in the art history of the 20th century, because it was more pure, it was objects, it was, you know, it has the aura of the fetish, you know, the fetishist aura of something that you cannot spoil. But Vogel showed me with this book that, you know, there were some forms of moving image that could have the same aura, and at the same time, they were more complex. So this was a great discovery, you know, how you could achieve this dignity and at the same time, you know, deal with the vulgarity of having to mix with narrative, having to deal with people. This is actors, real people that have to perform something. You know, how to deal, you know, with subjects, normal subjects, how to integrate in a system of production that it's the bourgeois system of production, how films are made nowadays and, you know, also in the 60s, but maybe more in the 60s, this we can discuss later. But, you know, how to mix, you know, this extreme purity that for him was inside these films with this context of creation, of chaotic creation, usually, that, you know, could tend easily to go to vulgarity, to go to, you know, easygoing, you know, absurd plot focused films. So for me, this was a very important discovery. And this complexity comes from a simple element that is moving image, as is in the title. It's moving, you know, so it's not just a frame. It's not, and it's not an object. It doesn't stay, you know, it doesn't remain, you know, fixed. It's moving, and your perception also is moving with the moving of this image. So, you know, and in this fluidity, in this movement, surrealists also, and some other people could see, and also with the dreaming side of the dark room with the screen, there was some fluidity that could move, or that all hidden, or that this latency that was the guarantee of the purity of the objects of art could also spread in a strange way, but in a real way too, and in a more effective way, maybe. This is the idea that in this latency of the unknown, of the magic or whatever, you know, that it's moving from one place to another, and that, I don't know, that it's changing your perception, and I don't know, the irrational part is mixing with the rational part, the non-logic part is mixing with the logic part of the narrative, but, you know, without having time to analyze it, without having time to fix it, without having time to put a value in it, because it's non-stable. So for me, you know, this idea of that with moving image, you know, the spontaneity, when you in the act of creating moving image, because of this chaos I described before, spontaneity, paradoxically, was easiest to put inside. I don't know, a painter that is doing a fixed image and a sculpture. Everything is designed in man before, even if you pretend that you are there doing action painting. It's much less chaotic than if you are surrounded by I don't know how many people with I don't know how many economical problems or financial problems, with tensions, with the pressure of all kinds, with real people. That the most difficult thing of filmmaking is dealing with real people, human beings. This is always in companies. You ask to the owners of companies, what is the most difficult thing? To deal with people. It's obvious. Imagine actors with their ego. These egocentric people, that it's very, it's much more difficult to deal with these people than, okay, we're doing, I don't want to dismiss the idea. But for me, this book discovered me this possibility that all these that we tend to vulgarity, in fact, no, could have the same class and the same glamour, to put it in a little bit ridiculous terms, than all this art of the beginning of 20th century of these artists that we all admire. And this is a discovery because of the irrational part, of course. All this reivindication of the films that Amos Vogel is talking, it's because there is I don't know, they are dealing with subjects that are very contemporary, and they are dealing with, it's the title, no, film as a subversive art, is they are dealing with all the, how to say, maybe repression, about the repression, the inside repression, and also about the oppression, the external oppression. Maybe there is for me, there was only another book that could match the influence it had on me, and I think at the level of quality, it's not exactly the same, importance, but for me it's very, very important. Maybe it's the second most important book about filmmaking from my point of view, that it's the Robin Hood film of horror movies. So it's a compilation of a lot of articles. But what happened with this book? That it's very important, and in fact, it's dealing with the same subjects that the Amos Vogel book. That the material, the point of departure that are the horror movie films, it has no, for me, and I think objectively, it had no interest. And it was really part of this vulgar popular art in even a worse sense than the normal popular cinema of Hollywood or the normal, cinema that was in our mind, the classical cinema. And maybe these films, and this is an important remark also made by Robin Hood himself, maybe most of these films were not interesting in themselves, or were not disturbing in themselves, but they were disturbing because of what they had to tell us about our society, and also about the hidden part of this society that it's, or we can say, repressed or oppressed, and obviously the link to Freud of this, because of this repression part that is unconscious, blah, 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 and also the oppressive part that it's conscious and it's exercised by, simple institutions or simple and clear forces we can identify. It's also very common with all the subject of the Amos Vogel book, and we can talk later maybe in the Q&A of these aspects. But I think that the Robin Hood mention, it's very important because for the one in New York, also somebody that was in New York, so for the ones who are interested in this subject, I think it's a very important and a little bit unknown book. Of course, the idea that in the repression there is the sexual energy, or the creativity, or the bisexuality, the idea of sexuality of children, all these taboos that are later mentioned in the Amos Vogel book. I think that this is something very remarkable that we all know that we can find in a very clear way in all horror movies. All these patterns of having, being scared of the other, the idea of the other, the monster, that interferes the normality, the normality of our bourgeois, heterosexual way of living, that it was scrapped from the inside because of repression, and also with forces that, tend to, hide this repression. And, so there were a lot of films that, that Vogel, points that he thought that they were interesting at this level, and the way they deal with these problems in the form could match or could have the dignity of the artworks that were already very praised at that time on the 60s and 70s, very, the level of money, very well paid, and with the glamour, of a successful thing. Then, okay, you see, for example, films from the 60s, we can start from films about performance or film made by artists themselves, like Warhol, Otto Muel, or, a lot of artists that were not filmmakers but made some films, and that dealt with the medium of moving image, and they did it in a specific way. They did it in a very, in a very personal way, without thinking a lot about the formal aspects of the media, but with the purity and with the aggressivity of artists. And they create some interesting films where, the traces of this primitive approach, of this idea that because of the technology of that time, and this is another discussion we can open, that at that time, the traces of how you were dealing with these, with these subjects, also with trying to create a destructive form, which is a paradox, but, I think it works to understand what I am talking about. This could work. And paradoxically, most of these, if we watch nowadays most of these films, they work because we see the traces of this impotence or of this impossibility. Because they try to make something like a feature. If you see Warhol films, of the second period, if you see Chelsea Gals or Flash or Treasure, Paul Morrissey films, they try to deal with narrative, they try to deal with characters, they try to deal with all we hate, or video artists also hate, or what's not important for him, or was, as I said, as a corrupt element that, remind this, this closed society that came from all the forms of art of the 19th century, and they were not dealing. They didn't want to have a form that contained these elements. So they tried to destroy it somehow. Warhol, with something that I really studied in his films and influenced me a lot, that is with working with actors, the way he worked with actors, with this total mix of the person, the actor, and the character, and with the traces visible, with the traces of this chaos visible. Usually, feature films try to hide the person, try to hide the actor, the vanity of the actor, but with Warhol, this is visible. And paradoxically, these traces were what gave the purity or the sensual aspect that make it art and not a feature boring film. A classic of feature film coming from cinephilia. He was not interested in filmmaking. He was interested in cinema as a popular art, how to reach the mass, how to make money. But, these traces nowadays, for us, they are very important. What happens, and I said that I will open this, with digital technology, you can do the same. You can be as subversive as Warhol at this level of working with actors. But you can hide the traces of your work. So apparently, so the latency and the purity and the ambiguity, especially the ambiguous and ambivalent element of what you are really doing. If an art film that should be as a subversive art film in the book of Vogel because it's destroying some kind of form, or no, you are apparently doing a feature film, but that from the inside is destroying everything, but it's not visible, and there is no traces. For example, the Big Gun film, Long Journey Through the Night. It's the perfect example of or the film, for example, I really love. We have this year a film by Gaspar Noé, by the film Climax. Are some films that are destroying, and are really, using elements that are very, very difficult to use nowadays in filmmaking, if not because of these great filmmakers doing it, but inside an industry and blah, blah, blah. Liberté, my own film, modestly. How do you do this? And what is destroying this film? Apparently, it's a normal feature, and there is no traces of this subversive aspect. Where are these subversive aspects in this film? Because digital technology allows us to, make it in such a sophisticated way that we can have both in the same film. We can hide the vulgar part of feature films we don't like, still being there, but we don't want to be part of the fetish world of the art, of the art glamour. We are just in a middle point that it's very difficult to assess, very difficult to describe, very difficult to make a critical judgment, even a static critical judgment of it, because everything is hidden. So, okay, it's not so easy, but it's what allows us, the contemporary filmmaking, and especially the contemporary technology, digital technology, when it's used, in this sense, or when it's used under the influence of Vogel subversive canon, in several aspects. And now I will get in some of these aspects that are very well detailed in the book, but maybe just to put some connections with modernity of nowadays, or more or connections with my practice methodology as a filmmaker. So I think that this is a very interesting subject, because you don't have any. You have all and you don't have anything at the same time, because most of the filmmakers are not well regarded by the art institution, by museums, because they think, no, this is feature films. This is narrative, this is actors, this is plot, this is TV series for them, or this is, classical cinema. But it's not at all. And it's much more complex. In fact, that the art they are showing, it's much more pure. And it's much more fetishist somehow. But you don't touch it, you don't see it, you feel it. If you are very intelligent, or if you follow the evolution of some of the filmmakers, you can really grasp it, but never fully. And this was, the main idea inside Vogel book, that the artist, it's somebody, or the poet artist, it's somebody that, can feel some magic, can show some magic, can really sense something that nobody else can do, can sense, the idea, and put a meaning on it, maybe, even if it's not understandable, the idea of sense for later. But nobody, even not himself, can fully grasp it, because it's, it's too complex, even for him. So this is we really reach this point nowadays. I mentioned one film or two films that go inside this, but we can mention a lot of, other filmmakers coming from China, for example. It was one of the obsessions of Vogel. I don't remember where. I don't know. Maybe it's not in this book. In Film as a Subversive, maybe it's another article. But sometimes he's wondering why China doesn't give us, the great subversive filmmakers. Maybe this was the 1990s or 2000. I don't remember where it comes in this question. But nowadays we know with digital, we know we had Wang Bing, we had Zhao Liang, we had, how many subversive, more or less subversive Chinese filmmakers. A lot, and all very interesting. So it was thanks to digital media that we could escape to some, censorship was at the beginning one of the main problems that the book of Vogel is dealing with, but also the way to do it practically. And even in non-conventional societies, if you see, I don't know, Ulrich Seidel films, some of them, how does he do it? I mean, it's, and it's something that it's very contemporary, and it's something that it's paid by all, all public institutions you can imagine in Europe, several countries, several cultures. So, there is a lot of examples that we'll put, we could, do new edition of the Vogel book and put interesting new examples. But let's go back now to the idea. What is a subversive art? This was the main issue. I was talking with this idea of social illness. We are in 20th century. All our notions, Vogel himself talks about all discoveries of science that, in the 20th century that destroyed our perception of how the world should be, obviously on philosophy, on language, philosophy of language, a lot of things that make our political issues, First World War, Second World War, Vietnam, Hiroshima. For him, it was a very important event, and he's talking a lot. And from an ideological point of view, it's very interesting because he was Jew and he left Austria when Hitler, the Anschluss with the family, but he never put, a special remark on this tragic event, or he put it at the same level. For him, Hiroshima was as tragic as, and if we analyze in a cold way nowadays, of course, what is how do you want to put the nuclear bomb killing, I don't know how thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in seconds, or I don't know. But, in a city that was populated by, women, children, and retired people mostly, So, you see, well, I don't know, it's somehow it's disturbing too, So, and obviously, it's the idea of Vietnam that was at that time very, for them, Vietnam was a reminder of something that goes wrong, really go wrong, and put equivalent in a lot of conflicts all around the world. So there is an illness, there is a social illness, and obviously the subversive artist, has to go, it's the one that points this or goes against this or, open consciousness of people, But, of course, to do it, it needs personal freedom. And this is the paradox, constantly described one time and another in a various ways, because it's very, entertaining and funny to read the book of how all these artists had to deal with this conflict between personal freedom and, this will of open consciousness of the conflicts of the era. But obviously, it's difficult because at that time was the beginning where the criticism was already integrated. We were at the time of Marcuse. And imagine nowadays, at the time of Facebook, Instagram, you don't know, you don't know anything anymore, You don't know where you are, you don't know who you are, you don't know ideologically who is who and why, and, it's totally confusing. So, but at that time, the criticism was already integrated. Then maybe on the Q&A we'll talk about how to be a subversive artist nowadays, if it's possible or not. This will be a funny conversation. But, it's obvious that it has got more complex nowadays, all this problem. But at that time, the idea that you could reach and you could open the consciousness of people, to make them be aware of some of this illness, some of this oppression or repression that were, really imposing, a vision of the world or a vision of what your life should be, this normality that horror films try to, make a suspicion over it and try to break. This was very, this was the main thing. Of course, Vogel, it's not he used innocence to analyze some things, but he's not enough innocent to understand that you can break this with, proper tools. Art, maybe it's not, an effective tool to really cut or break. Maybe open, conscious, but not to really change the world or change things. So this is another interesting dialectics inside the book that appears one time and another. And at the end, there is one obvious, obvious element, obvious question for him, that it's the problem of form. We need another tool to change the world, maybe. We can open some consciousness, but how to do it? without being integrated inside the system, because as I said, system starts to integrate criticism and likes, the criticism appear to say that it's a reasonable, system. So how to deal with it? And Vogel, in a visionary way, nobody else, does it with the same freedom of spirit and freedom of mind at that time, at least on filmmaker, and at least, coming with some kind of political roots, because he's analyzing images, and images are being ambiguous by definition. So, it's very critical, the exercise that he's doing. It's very dangerous, in fact. And one of the most interesting chapters is the one about Nazi poetry. Because he was Jew, he was, he had to leave Austria. So, and there all the paradox of what is an image, what is a documentary. I remember the description of the triumph of the will, how he tries to, reading Mein Kampf, blah, 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 but then he tries to, really, because and there is an important text, people don't remind, that he wrote in the 50s about what is a documentary, and there is the key points. It's in the book of, the Vienna institution made about all the compilation of his writings, or not all, but most of them, separate writings. So he's analyzing what is a documentary, 1950s, I don't remember which year. But okay, then confronted with this idea of what is a documentary, with the triumph of the will, he wonders, what's this? And okay, he was a malicious person because he found an interview with Leni Riefenstahl in the 30s when he says that the everything was prepared for the mise en scène of the film. In fact, he had million extras, he had everything, and everything was placed for the cameras, for the film. That as if he was doing a documentary, but millions of extras, what should be a paradox in all minds, were disposed or were direct somehow to make a documentary. And okay, then he found an interview after the war, and where she said, Leni Riefenstahl says, no, everything was spontaneous, and the fucking film cost me years of prison. And denying or forgetting, what he said in an interview during the Nazi regime in the 30s, I don't know, before 40s, of how the film was really done. So and this is the favorite subject of Vogel. We have these two interviews. Let's analyze the film. Let's see the images of the film, how this was done, especially a documentary. This was one of my theories of always. I don't like documentaries in general. And I said, I only like documentaries if I don't know how it was done. How is it possible that these people shoot this thing? If I don't know, even as a filmmaker, how do they make it? How do they convince the people? How they hide the cameras or not? Or how do they deal with this? If they pay them or not to do these disturbing things or to show this disturbing reality, how they were capable of materialistically doing it? For me, it's not a documentary. It's something else. It's a boring thing that should be written in a book, but not, showing in images. But in this case, with these two interviews, Vogel, I think it's quoting somebody else, tries to understand the film. And in fact, he says, the film it's a mirror, it's a clash of mirrors. That the film is a portrait of reality. It was all these fanatics at that time. It's the state of mind of Germany at that moment. So it's a real, truthful documentary. But then, everything is prepared for the cameras because he trusts the first interview of Leni Riefenstahl, and the intuition says that the way it's placed, the night shots. You need a lot of light to put them, you need to really prepare the things in a proper way. A lot of shots he describes, of Hitler himself. He's always alone, blah, blah, blah. Of course, it was a a way of Hitler also, represent himself in public. And it was also without cameras. The strategy was similar, probably. But still, there were some things that were really, really prepared. And to prepare, these huge elements, it's you need time and you need effort and you need to prepare it in a very concrete way, in the sense that it was prepared for the film. And it says, well, it's a portrait of a reality of that time, of that real people that it's there, real fanatics, but with a mise en scène that it looks will go for propaganda, but it doesn't stop here. At the end, you get something that it's really true documentary of that event. So here we start to have, the idea of a disturbing mechanisms of form. In this case, it's simple. It's how a documentary is done, or how these images tend to tell us something, or from which layer, they are when we are thinking. This is very fascinating for me. I have shot a lot of films with a lot of hours of rushes, and with a lot of chaos also, and with a lot of heterogeneous material, and it's very difficult to say from which layer or from which level that the images are talking to you. What is the predominant, element? It's very, very difficult, even with, months of editing, to really, be inside. And of course, because it's moving image, much more complex, and when you combine with edit, it's much more complex. You change the meanings and the feelings and the sensations and the atmosphere of all the previous images. You try to fix to use, and then suddenly what you saw, it disappears, and you don't know how to find it again. Because simply, I don't know, in the process of editing, I don't know. This is, we can discuss it in a more concrete way. But he understood, with this example of documentary, that the most subversive way to open consciousness, maybe not change them, is with form. He always said, the subversion of form, cannot be distributed to a lot of people. It's a minor, to the happy few. Massive audience will never go to attend and to watch films that are, with some kind of subversive form, destructive form, ununderstandable element of the form, but they affect more. The people that goes there really gets out more affected by it. And it's form, but it should be also a paradox. Because as a form, you will say, it's an aesthetic object. It goes back to his idea of art. Even it's filmmaking, there is no object at the end. But as an experience, okay, it's like video art. It's something that it's on your retina. Maybe it's on the surface of the screen. Maybe it's on the collision. No? This was another beautiful term when he was describing edit. He said, the subversive form of edit is when images are, put together by collision, not by simply joining them. So there was another interesting concept. But, people are really affected by it. He was affected. I was affected. I said, because of the prestige. It gives prestige to images. It gives, I don't know, something you cannot find anywhere else. So he was obsessed with this idea. Also, it's more shocking. Obviously, you have to be a little bit more intelligent, and he's talking a lot in the book about propaganda. Maybe I'm going too far. No, really, this will be a super long lecture. Okay, let's go. Let's put it, a little bit faster. But the idea that, this subversive form could deal with several aspects. I said, for example, the edit, this idea of community, the idea of the camera, if the camera should move or not, and why, what is the main idea of the camera moving. He says something very interesting. He said at the beginning, camera moving was a revolution because it put out of theater, of just shooting theater, with moving image. And, the moving camera was something lively, and it became, again, lively with the Nouvelle Vague and with the camera on the street, blah, blah, blah. But then he said, there were some other people that said, no, moving the camera, it's bullshit. This is for, feature films. This is horrible, like surrealists. Dali said, you should put a camera on the floor with nails and fix it and never move it. You know, like the magic, it's what is in front, it's this latency of what will happen in front of the camera, the mise-en-scène, you know? And we are not talking about, you know, a theatrical mise-en-scène, but that really the subversive part, it doesn't come from, you know, rhetoric mise-en-scène that for them was more closer to the 19th century narrative, even if it was used, you know, in a very sophisticated way by the Hollywood of the 40s or the 30s or the 50s, but it was, you know, so, and then, okay, the 60s, a lot of, you know, experimental filmmakers, the camera fix, again, no, Warhol, you know, that said, no, the camera moving, what a boring thing, you know. So, again, you know, an element can be subversive depending on the context and, you know, how do you deal with it and who is doing and for what, and especially, and this is one of the most incredible talent of Vogel in the writing, is how this affects you as a viewer, you know? And he's not talking intellectually. He's talking, you know, how this mise-en-scène, how these images, how this, you know, the form of these things, you know, affects your body, affects, you know, in a very textualist approach that it comes from really the 60s, and he was always faithful to it. We can say our sensations, but directly our body. You know, how do you react physically, but extremely in a physically way, even not in a psychological way. That it's another obviously important aspect, especially on the political level of the whole book. But you know, he doesn't reject, he keeps always the power of how the film, the images affect your body. So then, okay, you know, it's with this subversion of form, how you feel affected. Okay, narration, you know, or the use of the camera itself. It's another important aspect. Narration, you know, the Ziegabert of reivindication, what is, you know, obviously quite clear, that the idea, he put it always with nice words, that at the level of the narrative, you should work on the detection of a plot, not on the invention of a plot. You know? Of course, you know, you put two images together, you put even a person or an actor or a character, you will read something there. There will be a plot always, you know, and trust the power of this plot. You know, Ziegabert of Dixit. It's another, you know, interesting idea. I don't know, the camera, you know, for me this was an obsession. We can also see it in from different angles, and all of them can be subversive at some point. The idea that at Ziegabert of the camera is the eye, the camera, you know, it's what is really projecting, but, you know, in a super, you know, in a total identification, what is not the case of normal cinema, that there is always a projection with the camera of what the filmmaker wants to do, how he wants to show the world, what he wants to represent, what he wants to see in front of the camera. So there is a normal identification, and in the case of Ziegabert, should be total. But also there is the opposite side, that we are working, some filmmakers of the digital, that the camera with digital technology on the recording, but also on the digital, with the digital technology of the edit, can see things that the human eye, it's not able to see. Impossible. Totally impossible without this tool. I will be shooting something that even if I am, you know, extremely concentrated, I will not be able to see what the camera can record in an easier way, because the qualities of the camera are different from the qualities of the human eye. So this is, you know, an absolute conviction for me since the very beginning. I decided I have only shoot it with filmmaker, with digital technology, and edit with digital technology. So this is, and I will finish. This is, you know, something very important. What creates this idea of the perception the detection of a plot, what creates a natural dramaturgy, and what a French critic said about my films, that it's films based not in the dramaturgy of action, but based on the dramaturgy of a presence. You know, so a natural presence in front of the camera create this dramaturgy. So, you know, as you see, the ways, you know, the form, it's subverted. You know, the form can be really subversive. For Vogel was you know, the essential element to really create subversive art in moving image. You know, because for him, filmmaking was an act, was not an invention, was not a creative, this idea, the filmmaker behind the camera, you know, projecting, I don't know which idiocy plots coming from, I don't know which, you know, story or whatever. Well, it was an act in itself. And with this idea that the filmmaking is an act and not an invention, you know, life gets closer. It was one of his dreams, dangerous dream, you know, because total art, we all know what it can be. But it has a clear subversive power, of course, because it affects all institutions and yourself, you know, in a very radical way, you know, because you cannot be out of it. So I think that, and we have studied this a lot, and this will start to, you know, and maybe with this idea I finish, because it's a very interesting idea that it's, in Vogel it's very important, that is the politics of images, no? And especially from left wing, from leftism at that time, you know, because, you know, if we cross with life, if with, you know, filmmaking it's an act and it's not an invention, and then it's very, very close to life, you know, how to create a subversive form of art, you know? What it will be really subversive, or how this subversive aspect can be reintegrated, you know, into the normality or into the bourgeois capitalistic, you know, conventional way of living. This was, and we are in 2021, so we have seen a lot of changes in the last 20 years also, you know, much more than the ones described here. But he also, as a visionary, started to have the intuition that sometimes, and we can talk now, you know, some kind of politics of left can be translated in an unconscious way in a right-wing art, in a right-wing films at the level of form, but it's quite paradoxically. And on the opposite also can happen, that, you know, some films coming from a right-wing context that should be, you know, unfair, arbitrary, you know, fascist, whatever, could deal or could lead us towards a form that is, you know, subversive, that it's so crazy and so radical on its unfairness that led us to a subversive form of art at the formal level. So where is, you know, and here starts the ambiguity that, you know, has pointed all these questions until nowadays on the Trump era, and, you know, with this, all these images also at the level of fiction, as I described before with the film of Big Gun and with a lot of films we can talk nowadays. So I think that the relevance of the film of Vogel, it's clear. I am very happy to be the first one to, because it was a personal interest from a long time ago, and it was something that I really care about. And okay, it's a good initiative. It's a very New York, you know, person, and I think it's a New York, you know, treasure what you have here, and especially in the Lincoln Center, no? So, well, thank you very much for listening. Enjoy the program of the Vogel selection, and okay, we can open it to the audience on question and to Dennis. Thank you. Maybe it was too long, I don't know.
Thanks, Albert. That was great. We have, I think, 25 minutes in the theater, so I want to just, I have some follow-up questions for you, and then I want to get the audience in on this, because I know there are people in the audience who know your work, who know the book well, who know Vogel's work, so we want to hear from them as well. I feel like you threw out a lot of ideas, but one that kept resonating with me was this idea of that subversion isn't a fixed and static concept, obviously, and getting at the idea of what subversion might mean today was something that you touched on several times. So I'm wondering if we can maybe start with that question and flesh out some of the things you touched on. It seemed to me that you thought that digital media played a big part in this.
It's essential, because without this technology, for me, you cannot, because, well, subversion, it always, by definition, go against what is done before. And Vogel himself, says this in the book. So it's for the reason that, subversion can take all kinds of forms. But, of course, nowadays we have this tool that is a very interesting tool. And this tool has shown us what he had in mind, what some people of the Nouvelle Vague had in mind, all the possibilities of the media, but especially, that the ambiguity of the images were in fact bigger than we thought. That dealing with images and the digital era, especially with digital edit, that is something that really people do not realize of the potential, and it's very few people, the principles are clear, and how films are edited and the logic of edit. But, on the subtle elements, especially nowadays when they deal with narration, and with this idea of detection of plot or, of the characters, and things that are obvious with literature, For example, one of the books all the time that he quotes in the book is the Alain Grillet, pour un nouveau roman, un nouveau roman, so where are the principles of the destruction of what is a novel at all levels? So, in a modest way, digital has allowed us to do the same thing that writers were doing at the beginning of the century, but especially from the 50s or 60s, because you hide the traces. So it becomes a clean film, a pure, clean, that you really don't know. If you read a Rob Grillet...
Is that a subversive tendency?
Sorry?
Is that a subversive tendency for you? Like,
I think it's the only one possible, because, this will be a long discussion, because on the political level, I don't think, the integration of criticism goes so far nowadays that I think it's impossible to deal with it, because it will be integrated anyhow, anyway, anywhere, unless outlaw people, they are dealing with image, some documentary people in China, for example, or with extremely fascist regimes. But in normal countries, I mean, it's very difficult to create criticism. I don't know, we have writers who did it and did it well, and they were successful, and somehow they were integrated, but still, I don't know, Houellebecq, for example, or Elfriede Jelinek, or, some writers who still do, very strong criticism and more or less are still integrated inside the system, but they all deal, not Houellebecq, because he's doing in a hidden way, but they had to deal with the industry, they had to deal with the industry of publishing books, they had to deal with the media, they live in a normal world. You are not an isolated man or really a fighter that fights alone. Well, you fight more alone than ever, because aesthetically you are more alone than ever, because this is the paradox. The forms of subversion are almost, and it's the lesson of the Vogel book, that are individual. He really, is fond of every filmmaker for different reasons. Even if the book is an ensemble of subversion and there are chapters of, but you feel that he is really in love with every one of them because of personal reasons, and personal ways that these films affected him very different. But nowadays you are more isolated in the sense that the subtlety of what you do, for example, linked with nonsense, that it's another important subject, or linked with gratuity, or linked, or linked with the poetry of the narration. It's you have nice examples always in film festivals, but I don't know. It's very, very to the happy few nowadays.
Yeah. No, I'd like
to understand how important this is. It exists, more or less we all know, because these films are shown in film festivals, are not hidden at home. Because, how important they are, this is another, how the formal break, or the formal subversive part of it are so important. This is, I put a perfect example. I think the Big Gun film, Long Journey Through the Night, it's because, and the social outcome of this film is very interesting, because it was done with famous actors in China. You know, I don't know.
It was also a popular success.
Yeah, well, popular success
Because
the first
of
2 days.
Because of a misleading marketing campaign.
Yeah, no, it was because leading
Which
marketing.
is
Very subversive
for
but
20.
but the story is more interesting because he made, I don't know, millions and millions of tickets. I don't know, 8 million or I don't know, $1 million or dollars or whatever. The first 1 day or 2 days or first weekend, but then in 2 days, 3 days, nobody went. Because on the social net, everybody said, what is this bullshit? You don't understand anything. This is bullshit. This is bullshit. It's totally absurd. But it's a normal film. It's a romantic story. Apparently, it's a normal film, you know, with super famous actors. And you don't see anything wrong. That is an evidence in the film. Even for normal audience, well, you see that everything is too subtle, you know, simply. That is even too subtle for the super smart people. So, I don't know, these are isolated subversive acts that are done by chance. Not the aesthetical content of the film, the formal content, but I mean, to be part of a subversive life yourself, or to be part of a subversive movement, or consciously to pretend to be part of something that goes against the values. This is what I don't see how to do it. Because I think that, first of all, you lose innocence, and innocence is the most important thing we have done nowadays, because all the tools are so sophisticated that if you don't keep your innocence alive, these sophisticated tools of digital editor, of digital complexity will kill you. I mean, will, you know, beat you and will destroy you, because you will, so you have to keep the innocence alive. But before, the innocence was naturally alive because the tools were primitive and the traces were there. And the traces were the, how to say, the guarantee of the primitivism and of the purity. You know, but without this, that the tool it's sophisticated, then what do you have?
So how do you keep the innocence alive?
I don't know, you have to, this is another paradox, I think that Liberté shows it a little bit, it's the same paradox, we discuss it here, I think with the same, more or less. The idea that libertinage, you know, the idea of libertinage in Marquis de Sade novels, or even in my film, a little bit in the plot, a little bit in the images, is the idea that you have to force libertinage. But it's a paradox in our mind, because libertinage is about freedom, it's about that you deal with it in a spontaneous way. But they say, no, there is a program behind. We will push you, we will force you, we will oblige you to be a libertine. So it's the same idea with innocence, you know? Innocent, it looks like that, okay, you have to be innocent because you don't know things, or because you are just a stupid or an ignorant, or because, but you don't think that you can be innocent, pushing yourself on innocence, making a lot of pressure on yourself to keeping the innocence alive. And you do it with putting pressure and with destructive elements. Only with destruction you can keep the innocence alive. What it's a little bit what we see in some of the films of the 60s, Automuel, and you know, that it was the, you know, they were, when you have, for example, when you have all the free love experience, you can only go farther and farther to keep the innocence alive, and it's the Marquis de Sade teaching. Because only farther and farther, it's not that you became more criminal or more, it's the opposite. You want to be more innocent, so you have to go further. So this is subtle in dealing with form nowadays of the moving image, but I think it's important. I don't know, you have to, when you feel that you are in a safe territory, at the level of form, doesn't matter if at the level of edit, camera, whatever, all the elements, you have to destroy it. And then, okay, it's risky because, but it's, for this reason, a lot of the films in Amos Vogel Lecture are non-perfect, imperfect, full of imperfections. And a lot of, obviously, subversive films nowadays, it's full of non-satisfying feelings at the level of experience as a spectator. It's totally unsatisfying. And the perfect example is the Big Gun film. Or also Climax, for example, it's a film that it's a remarkable film from my point of view, because it didn't satisfy the classical fans of Gaspar Noé, because they found it was, you know, a little bit too abstract, a film about sex and drugs, but without sex and drugs. You know, it was disappointing for them. But at the same level, me was an exception. But some cinephiles didn't like it because he said, "What is this? You know, it's too abstract. We don't, you know, we don't like it." So you are in this unknown territory that makes it difficult.
You concluded on this note about the politics of form, and you were talking about these sort of like confused films, you know, that have like are maybe left wing in sentiment but right wing in form and vice versa. And I'm wondering if you had any examples in mind.
You know, this is typical. We can put. Do you know any right-wing film in film festival or in conventional, you know, film festival, even, you know, Venice, Cannes, Locarno? Do you know any filmmaker that praised himself of making a right-wing film or coming from a right-wing ambience or defending right-wing aesthetic values? No. Apparently, all of them come from the left wing. But then the films, you know, at the level of, you know, accommodation of, you know, the points of view of normality, of normal values, of course, they all pretend that they touch something a little bit more disturbing. But in general, the price to pay may be, I don't know. I don't know what is the guarantee nowadays. It's very difficult to say. Mm-hmm. Because what is the guarantee of the subversive aspect exists? It's too subtle. I don't know. It's like we arrive at a point that it's like contemporary art. You know, it's impossible to make a critical judgment. What is good, what is not, what is respectable, what is... I don't know. It's very difficult. In general, I found everything, you know, quite right-wing at the level of form. Mm-hmm. I don't know. But it's not a problem. For example, one of the interesting films of comments on the Vogel book, it's when he talks about Death in Venice, the Visconti film. He likes the Visconti films in general, but it was surprising that this film, that when you see it, you know, I saw the film a long time ago, I saw it twice, and I didn't like it very much. Then I read I read it again, the book, the Vogel comment, and I saw it in a different way. Because, I don't know, he sees that the latency is there, and even if, I don't know, it looks like that it's a right-wing form or it's a classical film, there is, you know, a hidden latency. Of course, it's the latency that we all know it exists, because, I don't know, Visconti was gay, blah, 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 and it's this myth. But still, you know, the way he describes it makes it more obvious. And then I saw it again and I said, well, it's true. In this mannerism, ridiculous mannerism, it could say the same of Almodovar films. You know, in this ridiculous mannerism, in some of them more than in others, but maybe there is something, you know, disturbing. But you have always doubts. You are never sure. I am sure of some examples that are more arty. I don't know. There is some, for example, the Pitch and Pong film who won the Palme d'Or, Uncle Boomy. Mm-hmm. You know, it's full of subversive elements. You know, very interesting, and it's obvious. For me, they were too little and too separated. Maybe they were not integrated in a perfect way in one single concept of subversion. Mm-hmm. But okay, it was full, and it was full of interesting subversive elements, and it was a mainstream, well, not mainstream, but so there is examples, but I don't know, it's very arty what's going on.
What do you think is your most subversive film?
What?
What do you think is your most subversive film?
Maybe Liberté, because it was 2018. A story of my death, it's subversive because it's, you know, an aesthetic landmark in a very formal level. But Liberté, you know, it deals with something difficult nowadays, and I have a lot of examples. Even I I shoot a film recently, and, you know, in 3 years the world has changed regarding the subject of nudity. And so imagine, in Vogel time, the era was changes were happening slow. What was, you could have a little bit more orientation, because we're happening as a social movement, you know, accompanying a social movement. It were a little bit slow. There were clash, and there were, you know, moments of significant moments. But it was nowadays everything is arbitrary, totally arbitrary. Nobody knows, you know, where we are, and it happens very fast. So, I don't know, and in these 3 years of, shooting previous film with nudity, and a lot of things changed, no? And it was a friend of mine who told me, look, you can go to Cannes, you can go to Venice, go to Berlin, watch the films where there is a woman that is nude, showing it's nude, and all these films are made by women. It's very difficult to find one single example in recent years, 2 last years, or 1 last year, where there is women naked in a film made by a man. So this is a total shame. And from sociological point of view, I am not interested at all with this. But what should interest Vogel for this? What is the difference of the form?
You didn't see the Paul Verhoeven film, I guess.
Maybe Paul Verhoeven.
Okay,
But I mean,
Yeah.
it's an exception. No, I haven't seen it. But it's an exception, and coming from the past, from an old filmmaker who did it already several times in an old-fashioned way. So it doesn't say nothing against it's not my theory. It was somebody, there's a programmer who told me this. So, and I said, maybe, maybe because in the past there were more male filmmakers and almost all films were done by male filmmakers, and now a lot of films are done by women. Obviously, statistically there is a reason too. But there is something outrageous, something very subversive in this idea of describing nudity, as an act of power of the filmmaker, of obliging, it's not the word, but, obliging is, pushing, the actors of using nudity, and especially, in a context that could be arbitrary. Because when you deal with nudity, all people say, all actors, everybody will say, it has to be justified. If not, it's justified by the plot. If not, what you are doing? We are doing what, what Amos Vogel describes in his book, subversive acts of subversion, of filming, of filmmaking subversion. Because if it's integrated in the plot, this is, boring.
Right.
So, but the question arises very often nowadays. When you deal with actors, you say, no, well, but it has to be justified. Well, it's arbitrary things that, make it subversive. And in the last film, I was confronted with this problem in this film that I shoot recently. It's not, I haven't...
the one you just finished shooting.
I haven't started the edit, so I don't know what the film will be. Maybe it will be horrible, I don't know. But, this idea of there is moments, and it's about also a politician. It's a film about a politician, so also moments of... And it's the idea, I think it's a very interesting idea, that we have to describe evil, but I don't know. Evil wins, evil is there, and of course I don't like evil, but I don't know. I am as a portrait in fiction, because this is another interesting thing. The people nowadays, it's the utopia, but in the opposite way. People nowadays make confusion between reality and fiction. You see all this politically correct movement where you say, this work of art, you cannot show it because, well, I don't know what happens there in that film or in that. I said, well, but it's a fiction, Or in that novel, the editor will say, better not to describe this act of violence, that it's based on an unfair situation. Okay, but it's a fiction. He said, it's a fiction. It's not real. It's an eternal problem. It's trying to say something else. This is there, or maybe not, or maybe, it's a subversive art that it's just there to provoke you something that it's totally wrong. But, you have to feel this wrong. The author wants you to feel this wrong.
So this climate that you're describing, is it one in which subversion is more difficult or more necessary, or both?
I think it's literally this kind of frontal subversion. It's impossible nowadays because it's I don't know. It's you need a lot of courage and probably there is no. I don't know. You have to deal with yourself first.
Yeah.
You know, the self-censorship. It's more. It's there. And it's so mixed with this that frontal subversion. But indirect subversion, precisely linked more deeply with form, it's perfectly valid. And it's, you know, the heritage of Vogel, it's good. And it's very important because of this. Because in an indirect way, even more high than in the form, it can work. And it can affect really people, and also it can provoke acts of subversion in reality. This film began, you know, the result of this film as a production itself. So, but at the political level, I don't know. You know, this confusion between reality and fiction has made it very difficult to make. Because for people on the politically correct, everything is a statement. You know, so no, this is not a statement. This is a fiction. This is a, I don't know, a form of narrative moving in front of you. That's all. Okay, deal with it as you want, but you are free, of course, as a viewer, of deal with it in your, you know, ideological prejudice. But it's not. It's good also to, as Vogel did always, go to see the film and see what happens to your body and to your sensations, not only intellectually, you know, thinking that there is some meanings there that are important to you and blah, 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 that are attacking you. It just, okay. And fairness, it's another element we have to deal with, you know. And the idea that we are now putting, you know, white things on the fiction and then, you know, the world is more unfair now than, you know, 50 years ago, so.
Let's take a question or two, perhaps, if there are any. Yes, in the back, yeah. Sorry, could you speak up a bit? I can't hear.
Yeah, about louder, because we cannot.
Yeah. We heard most of it, but you were asking about the politics of subversive. Because of the political climate today, or because? Do you think subversive films have to be anti-fascist?
I don't know. They have to be. The politics are complex, you know, nowadays, you know, because in the past there were Marx, Freud, as we said, you know, the elements were clear. Who was the enemy? Nowadays, of course, the enemy, it's not so clear. And especially linked with the aesthetics freedom, it's almost is even less clear. So from which angle attack this? Of course, we are talking maybe about something different, provocation. That it's an interesting element inside the subversive aspect of films and maybe a necessary element somehow. Here we see that most of the films share inside the subversive aspect the provocative aspect, but not all, you know. Some that deal with the form, you know, deal in a little bit separate way. But of course, if somebody thinks that provocation is necessary, there are ways of provocation that are more obvious than others. And maybe, yes, some extreme ideology can always, you know, But then, again, you know, we had Donald Trump that was more subversive in his comments that you can say, you know, you can do with a lot of films or images or what you can ever think. You know, so then, again, the form, it's what makes it, you know, long-lasting, and that makes it really challenging and serious, and of course, aesthetically relevant, but also politically relevant. The paradox, I leave it in a very, and just to understand this, because the context is very important. When I started, there was a law with, I think it was with Hollande in France, that said that, okay, we have to put the salaries of these, you know, workers up, no? And everybody agreed, because it's a left-wing, you know, politics, that it's good, that the people that it's working in the show business or in the film industry receive more money, more guarantees, more whatever. Yeah. Okay, everybody agreed. What happened? The result, the productions, the more fragile productions were not able to be done because the salaries were too high, and to have the salaries high, you need more finance, and to get more finance, you need the TVs, and to have the TVs, you need to make a conventional film. Mm-hmm. So, a politic from left wing, coming from left wing, you know, had as a consequence a right wing form in general, you know, of the films that were done, because all the conventional system at the level of production, you know, so this is the paradox. And okay, sometimes what I said, you know, strange or crazy countries or crazy moments of history create subversive forms of art.
I'm sorry to have to cut us short, but I'm getting the sign that we have to get this theater ready for our next screening, but maybe people want to continue the conversation outside if you are happy to meet and chat with people. We also have books for sale.
Buy it, because it's always out of print, and if you try to buy it on Amazon, it's very expensive.
So I want to thank you all for coming. And Albert, really, this is a pleasure, and you've left us with a lot to think about. Thank you for kicking off this. Thank
you very much. I hope
lecture.
the tradition will go on.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you so much.